Thank you. Good afternoon, all of you. Thanking ET Dehradun Smart City, and the government of Uttarakhand for having invited me over here to speak on this very relevant theme of financing for smart cities, which is so very important today when municipalities are reeling under a lot of budget deficits and crunches in human resources and financial resources. So without much ado, we'll just go to the presentation straight away. With the various approaches to smart cities, the one is a top-down approach, and then there's a collaborative approach. So when you talk of top-down approaches, my presentation here would be focusing on international best practices, which is what I'm bringing to the table today, because all of you here are experts in the national best practices in smart cities. So if you look at top-down approaches, the Masdar city in UAE, the ICT infrastructure solutions that they brought about in their city is a very capital-intensive smart city solution that was brought about in this city. Another example is Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which invested a lot in city control systems, like the ones that even the mission director was talking about, which is being set up in the ministry, city control systems. Even Dehradun Smart City Limited is thinking of putting up a city control systems. So these are top-down approaches to smart cities. Then the example of Seoul in South Korea, where they invested a lot of capital on generating heat maps for the city. So these heat maps are actually maps that identify potential locations of employment so that the smart city interventions could be directed spatially in those locations. So these are all capital intensive solutions, top-down approaches. Another approach to smart city is looking at smart city as an ecosystem, as a collaborative approach, wherein the government, the academia, the private sector, and the civil society is all together in one platform in a level playing field. These kind of solutions like that was tested in New York, where they had co-working spaces. Co-working spaces actually hosted about 30 incubators and accelerators and contributed to about $6 billion of economic growth. So this is again another new age smart city solution. And India too, we're not lagging behind in this co-working spaces. Many of our metropolitan cities do have these spaces, which is actually considered a smart city solution. Then again, the solutions adopted by Spain for open challenge methods for attracting citizens' voice and citizens' opinions on smart city. And even World Bank has a web portal called City Sense, where they invite innovative solutions from the citizens on this web portal. So these are some economic, cost-effective solutions in smart cities. But whatever approach you follow, top-down or collaborative, citizens are increasing in their demands, and municipalities and local governments are hard stripped for funds and human resources. So we look at what is the situation of the ULBs in India today. Well, it's not such a bright picture actually. As per RBI data, most of the municipal corporations are actually running into a negative deficit, except for the few leading municipal corporations like Ahmedabad, etc. We also have the spending on civic services by most of the MCs falling way below the Zakaria committee norms. And this aspect, this situation is actually attributed more towards the, as per the analysis of RBI, it's attributed to the high dependency on grants and the low autonomy in the way to spend their revenues. So of course 14 Finance has changed this paradigm. There's a paradigm shift with the 14 Finance Commission devolution of funds, in which municipalities have the freedom to spend the money the way they want to. But post 14 Finance also RBI has done an analysis, and surprisingly it is seen that most of the spending, a large part of the spending has been a rural development rather than urban development. So this brings us to a point of introspection. What is it that we are missing here, and what are the kind of municipal finance tools that have been adopted internationally? Why don't we just have a quick glimpse of some of the best practices that are followed internationally in mobilizing funds by municipal corporations. So some of these municipal finance tools that are followed globally and means acknowledged as best practices, one is the government-based through subsidies and bonds. Development exaction tools, dedication requirements, tap fees, linkage fees, and impact fees. These are some of the dedication exaction tools from developers, how you extract in monetary terms or through alternative methods, exact the developers to come and contribute to the city development. Public-private partnerships, which is a long old concept in India, but really not structured well and not so successful till today, except a few isolated examples in various cities. leveraging private funds through various instruments like value capture and tax incremental financing. So if you look at municipal bonds in India, before 2013, the situation was not so dynamic, and we just had about 1,700 crores mobilized through municipal bonds till 2013, and the largest one was 300 crore by the Karnataka Water and Sanitation Pooled Fund. But post the Amrit and Smart Cities, we've seen a surge in municipal bonds. Muni bonds is what they're called, as we all are aware. 94 cities have been assigned credit ratings as smart cities, and 2018-19, 8 cities floated muni bonds worth 3,200 crore. And Amravati has floated the largest muni bond for 2,000 crore, and Pune has begun its journey with a 200 crore muni bond. So we're seeing that municipal bond is picking up as a big tool for attracting finance. So when we look at the various kinds of bonds that have been adopted internationally, so for the benefit of some of the municipalities and municipal corporations which are advanced today in India. So one such example is a general obligation bond. Now this bond is something which is a bond which is floated for a specific city infrastructure like a park or a transportation sector issues. So this was successfully done in 2006 in California, where they raised about $37 billion through this GEO bond, and about $20 billion of this was for transportation, for the transportation sector. The characteristics of these bonds, it's quite a successful bond if the provided the municipal corporation is healthy, fiscally healthy, and the repayments for this is mainly through the tax revenues that the municipality gets. So revenue bonds. Now revenue bonds are bonds which the repayments are actually linked to the fees which the asset actually attracts. Like for example, the toll, which is the most popular revenue bond in India, the toll fees, that's a user fee, but a bond which is pegged to the repayment derived from the fees, that is the repayment fees for the asset that is created. This was successfully employed in Mexico, where they had a 6-point agenda for energy efficiency upgradation, and the schools over there raised about $20 million in energy efficiency funds, and 90% of that was, they were asked to redirect that towards repayment of the bonds, and 10% was, they were allowed to keep it to themselves for their own activities. The only problem with the revenue bonds is that it has to be structured well, and the repayment of that, the fees that the asset derives has to be long enough to repay the capital costs of the asset. Green bonds, now that's something which is ahead of its times in India, but and also globally it's still being tested, but these are typically financed by World Bank and ADB for attracting infrastructure in green energy and energy efficiency upgrades for homes and infrastructure. This was successfully tried out by Sweden, where about 500 million Swedish krona was mobilized through this green bond recently. The only drawback of the green bond is that performance data is still lacking, and it's still nascent globally as well as in India. User fee. Now, the city of Toronto at one point of time was reeling under a budget deficit about 500 million US dollars, and the Canadian government actually does not allow any city to be in revenue deficit. So they were forced to look at alternative methods of mobilizing resources, and so they resorted to various means like imposing a parking fee for the citizens through mobile apps, and charges for setting up a new home, and also subscribing to city-run programs. Now through this they attracted about $400 million through just subscribing to city-run programs. Now the advantage of such kind of bonds is that it is easy to implement, but at the same time it leaves out certain citizens, the low-income citizens, from using city facilities if they cannot afford to pay for those fees. Now, dedication requirement, this is an interesting instrument which perhaps many of the municipal corporations can try out, wherein the developer, any developer wanting a non-residential development in that particular zone will have to actually contribute to some social infrastructure. So this was successfully tried out in Texas, where for every 56 acre of non-residential development, 1 acre of green park was essentially required to be provided by the developer. And many counties have actually reached their green goals through just such dedication requirements. So if this is embedded in the master plan, then it's an easily implementable tool. But it's just that it's not very popular with the developers, so that needs to be worked out. So this is an interesting instrument which can be studied further. Linkage fees. Now this is another interesting instrument is tried by Boston, where they actually charge the developer for increase in FSI or for a change in land use zoning. The charge would actually go into an affordable housing trust or a job trust. So through this, they actually raised about $45 million for affordable housing alone. This is again a good instrument, but not very popular with developers. And it also, it meets with resistance from developers. And also we have to be careful that it is embedded in the local land use practice. Then if you talk of public-private partnerships, the oldest city in the US, Quincy in Massachusetts, did a very iconic PPP venture in which they tied up with a development firm called Streetworks, and they brought about iconic signature changes in the architecture of the town, with bringing about $340 million of public improvements, residential spaces, retail spaces, etc. So this is a PPP which was extremely well structured, and the interesting part of this PPP is that the Streetworks, which is the development firm, actually brought, invested in infrastructure, and the authority then bought this over from the development firm. So it was the other way around, rather than the authority providing the streets and the basic infrastructure, the developing firm or the private sector provided the basic infrastructure, and it was paid for by the local authority. So PPPs are interesting as long as it is structured well, it can be successful in the long term. Tax increment financing. This is another interesting tool which was successfully implemented in Missouri, where for every new investment that comes to a town or a city, you tax the increment in property value that is gained by some property owners because of the introduction of this new investment. For example, when Walmart was introduced in these counties, they actually taxed those property owners which actually gained the maximum from the introduction of such investments. So this is an interesting tool again. But just that if the property owners who can't afford this beyond a certain period of time, they may then be forced to leave the town or the city. So that's a disadvantage which we may want to take note of. Value capture instruments. Now this is extremely powerful instrument that has been tested in, especially in Latin America, with a great deal of success. In India, we've just tried the transfer, the TDRs, which have been successfully implemented in Mumbai, but I'm not sure whether it's been replicated well enough in other cities. I think it's again lack of lack of financial structuring. Robust financial structuring is required for this, which is what is keeping the TDRs from being replicated in India, I believe. And the other value capture instruments like betterment contributions and SEPACs, etc., have been very successfully tried out in Latin America. You may want to research on these and see how they've actually contributed to large infrastructure funding for their cities and towns. The only issue with this being that perhaps it's difficult to demarcate the benefits that are derived, which is a citizen that derives benefits from this, and how do you geographically demarcate the benefits that are derived from such infrastructure investments. So whom do we tax and whom we don't tax? So that's a big administrative exercise that needs to be undertaken. At the end of it, I'd just like to say that these are various tools that I've just kind of sensitized the officials to, but it's a combination of various tools that works. A particular infrastructure project, you can adopt various tools to come out with a sustainable solution. And what we have seen through the morning discussions, the various smart city solutions, extremely interesting. And it's nice to see that there's a lot of progress made in individual solutions. But at the same time, I think what message that I would like to give is that we should not miss the big picture. We should have a plan that that threads together all these smart city solutions, and we look at a long-term implication of such solutions also. Thank you very much.